Good afternoon, good morning, and good day to depending on where you're dialing in from. We have an awesome set of speakers, and we have an equally awesome audience from all across the country, from different time zones, different states, different companies. At last count, I think we have almost over 80 people that have signed up for this broadcast. So, really excited to be able to talk to you guys about continuous monitoring, security, and compliance. So we have a pretty packed schedule and a pretty packed set of awesome speakers that include Amit Garg from the Berkeley Research Group. He's an expert in cybersecurity, compliance, risk management. So he will give us an overview of the business imperative and why organizations need to be really concerned about continuous monitoring, compliance, especially on cloud platforms. I am GP. I am the principal of Stack Armor, and I will also be your host for the proceedings today on this webinar. Joining us on this broadcast are Cam, who is the Senior Solutions Architect at Splunk. We also have Saeed Masood, who is the Senior Solutions Architect at Trend Micro. So really excited to have everybody be here online. I also encourage the audience to go in and make sure that you familiarize yourself with the GoToWebinar interface, and you will have the ability to go in and ask questions as we proceed. And so what we will do now is go ahead and start this wonderful session, and I will hand over sort of the virtual baton to my co-speaker, Amit Garg from the Berkeley Research Group. Amit, handing it over to you.
Great. Thank you, GP. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. Today I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about, continuous monitoring, the importance of continuous monitoring, especially when you're dealing with cloud operations. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is, before I get started, I just wanted to quickly share my background with you because, I attend a lot of conferences and webinars, and I always wanted to know, like, what makes me a so-called expert, or, why would you want to listen to me, sort of span here. So I've been with Berkeley Research Group for just over 3.5 years. I'm a director in their technology advisory practice, focusing on cyber risk and privacy. I've been in the security industry for just over 18 years or so, and I've worked with a lot of organizations in the Fortune 500 space, government agencies, and a variety, multiple verticals in the financial services, healthcare, aerospace, defense, consumer products, etc. A lot of my experience is focused on enterprise security program management, enterprise governance, risk management, compliance, data privacy, business continuity resiliency, security awareness, and cyber risk due diligence for M&A transactions. And I worked for a number of other well-known firms like Deloitte, RSA Security, and I've seen a lot of interesting things over the years. Worked both as a government contractor in business development sales, and of course, from a consulting aspect as well. Next. So wanted to spend some time going over giving you some statistics on what's going on in the cloud adoption space and all the associated risks that come about with migrating to the cloud. So a lot of the statistics that I have here on the screen right now are from the McAfee report that came out recently titled Cloud Adoption and Risks. So if you look through some of these statistics, number one is 83% of organizations worldwide are storing sensitive data on the cloud. And 21% of all those files in the cloud contain sensitive data. And it's been up 17% over the past 2 years. So what does this exactly mean? Is basically that more and more companies are using cloud to store sensitive data, and year over year, more of the files that are on the cloud contain sensitive data. And of course, what sensitive data could mean would be different, from organization to organization. But there is also a significantly increased more sharing on the cloud. That's one of the advantages of using the cloud, is to be able to leverage a low-cost infrastructure to be able to share data and in an on-demand infrastructure. Another interesting statistic is that enterprise organizations have an average of 14 misconfigured instances for either the infrastructure as a service or platform as a service running at one time, which has resulted in an average of 2,269 individual misconfiguration incidents per month. Think about that. That's from if you're averaging 14 servers instances, and that's resulting in over 2,000 misconfiguration incidents. And again, the word even incidents, what that means is it could be different from one company to the next. Another interesting statistic I learned from that report was that 5.5% of AWS S3 buckets have real world reopened permissions, making them open to the public. And of late, that's been a big issue, because there has been a number of reported incidents over the past year. So just wanted to cover a couple of them. So back in June of 2017, last year, you may recall, U.S. voter records personal data was exposed on 198 million American voters. And what happened was that there was a company that put the PII and the voter profiling data at risk by storing them on a wide open S3 bucket. And that information was publicly accessible by anybody who had that link. And basically, that was a result of a misconfigured S3 bucket. Another incident is the National Credit Federation, where they, back in December of 2017, the data was exposed of 111 gigs of detailed financial information was exposed, including full credit reports on about 47,000 people. And this, again, was a reason for that was a misconfigured S3 bucket. And the information included credit card information, bank account details, full credit reports, etc. And the last one I wanted to share was Uber. And I'm sure most of us use Uber all the time without even thinking about it. But a while back, they had an incident where 57 million customers' PII was exposed. And what Uber tried to do in that instance was that they bribed the hackers with a $100,000 payment to keep the incident quiet. However, it still made it to the public. And the way this breach occurred was that the hackers were able to access the private GitHub account of Uber's, and they were able to extract the company's AWS credentials. And again, in this case, the configuration was not the issue, but the issue was a leaked password. And probably the most obvious way to prevent that from happening was using stronger protection, like multi-factor authentication on that password. And again, I don't want to go through I'm not going to read through all of these numbers here, but the point here is that there has been a significant uptick of sensitive data being stored on the cloud, and more incidents are occurring, and most of the time organizations are not even realizing that this has happened. And a lot of it is due to misconfigured accounts on AWS and other cloud services platforms. Next slide, please. So what's, as we say, statistically it's impossible to be 100% secure. So why are we spending so much time being reactionary and not taking proactive steps to reduce that risk factor? One of the common denominators that we see across all of these highly a lot of the regulations that have come out over the years, whether it's HIPAA, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR requirements, or DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, around requiring NIST 800-171 security requirements, or NIST 853 if you're a federal government agency, or GDPR, and even the New York State Department of Financial Services requirement, 23 Code 23 NYC RR 500. What's the one thing in common that all of these requirements have? And the key thing is instant response is the common denominator. They all have that requirement that anybody who falls under these regulations have a strong incident reporting and response capability. The majority of these requirements, regulations have a typical 72-hour instant reporting requirement upon discovery of an incident. And I've just included a definition from the New York State DFS, and how they define a cybersecurity event is each covered entity shall notify the superintendent as promptly as possible, but in no event later than 72 hours from a determination that a cybersecurity event has occurred. Now, what this means is that this is just the DFS's definition. If you look at all of the other regulations, they have a very similar requirement for notification to the officials within that 72-hour of discovery. Additionally, if you look at state requirement notification rules, all 50 states now have a data breach laws, plus DC and Puerto Rico. And what's interesting is that every law is different and it's constantly changing. And it often requires reporting up to a state official, such as the Attorney General or somebody else. And what's also interesting is that many of these breach requirements have a very short and specific deadlines for the notifications. But again, the common denominator again is in order to have a fast, accurate compliance with each of these regulations, and especially with the state breach laws, it is essential to have an effective incident response plan. And the whole point of incident response planning is to have something in place before the breach occurs, so you're not having to scramble after the breach. It's like the example of, if you don't have the fire alarm in place in your house, and if it doesn't detect the smoke or the fire alarm, there's no point because the house is already burnt down at that point. You'd want to have an incident response plan in advance so you can mitigate some of that risk. Next slide, please. So having talked about having incident response planning in place is important. The need for continuous monitoring is a bigger requirement. Now, if you look at the overall problem that we currently face today, is that cyber attacks are at an all-time high, and it's only getting worse. There isn't a day that goes by that we don't hear about another breach or another attack and all those kinds of things. Increased digitization of businesses has led to a larger attack surface. So what that means is that as more and more businesses get online and go through business transformations, or if they're leveraging the cloud, for example, that's only increasing the risk and the attack surface, the exposure for your business. Leveraging new technologies in IT infrastructure and tools is also creating a lot of vulnerabilities. I mean, even with the just outside of cloud, if you have mobile devices or BYOD policies in place, especially with the Internet of Things, if you're using any kind of sensors in any of your businesses, that's creating additional vulnerabilities. Another problem area is around third-party risk, where if you have several vendors or business partners or even subcontractors in in support of your contracts with your customers, whether it's government agencies or in the private sector. There's a significant amount of third-party risk as well. And all of these risks are being complicated by the fact because there's of the widespread shortage of security talent and outsourcing. And of course, the cost of these once these breaches happen, the cost of those breaches are ever increasing as well. So you could be organizations are seeing more and more lawsuits, fines and penalties, loss of revenue or customer loyalty. There could be negative. They're also facing negative publicity, reputational loss. So there's higher level of cost beyond just a financial cost in every aspect when it comes to these breaches. So what's the solution for this, right? So how do we mitigate some of these risks? So one of the things that I advise my clients is that focusing on best practices around how you do cybersecurity is that inventory your assets, your hardware, software, infrastructure. Whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on premise. It shouldn't matter. You need to understand what you're protecting before you actually can protect it. You need to conduct a data inventory and establish governance policies, conduct penetration testing, vulnerability, and periodic vulnerability assessments. And again, it really is about continuous monitoring at the end of the day, because if you take your eye off the prize of that data, how will you ever know that there has been a compromise? And the other item I want to talk about is that you need to treat cyber incidents like any other crisis that can happen to your organization, and bring it up to the right levels in your organization. It should be a board level matter or at the C-level matter. I'm going to turn it back to GP and let me know if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Amit, for that really deep insight. I think what's very interesting is you're tying incident response requirements to the absolute need for continuous monitoring and compliance. I loved your fire alarm analogy. It's so appropriate. For you to be able to go in and respond, you need to have somebody, A, install the fire alarm, B, listen to it when it beeps, and C, know what to do when it does beep. So I think all of those are in the area of continuous monitoring and response. Thank you for that. We'll hold the questions till the end. We have a great lineup of speakers following us, including Cam from Splunk and Saeed from Trend Micro. So I'll go next. As I said, I'm GP. I'm the principal at Stack Armor, and what we do is essentially focus on helping what we call security and compliance focused customers take advantage of commercial cloud platforms such as AWS, and more importantly, avoid some of the pitfalls and some of the challenges associated with ensuring that you're able to go in and make best use of these capabilities. So I just want to share with you some of our experiences in this space around continuous monitoring and compliance. And so really, if you're a typical system, program, or digital asset owner, you're always concerned about, as Amit so rightly said, there are always these attempts at accessing sort of the prize, which is your data. It has value, and there are people that are after it. And so really the challenge, while we're able to do things faster, cheaper, using commercial cloud technologies, but really, how do I go in and make sure that that environment is constantly protected? And I think the biggest challenge that we see that most organizations have is adapting to the new sort of cloud reality where these environments are not static. And I think most people that have dealt with IT infrastructure, they have sort of this nuance of do a vulnerability test or a penetration test once, and we lock down the system, and then we are good to go for the next 12 months till such time as we do another check. And that's just not true. In the day of DevOps and sort of dynamic environments where you're able to achieve the elasticity, take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud. It's a dynamic environment, and so therefore you need to be able to come up with a new paradigm, which is really the key topic of today. And so what we have done is we have worked with customers in trying to solve the continuous monitoring and compliance problem for almost a decade now. And so what we find is the top three questions that always come up are, where do I begin, right? So let's say I'm a hospital, or I'm a financial services organization, a bank, a credit union, or I'm a nonprofit organization that's dealing with donor data or other healthcare information, or I'm a public sector organization, right? And so where do I exactly begin? And again, based on our experience, the NIST 800-53 guidance is something we've worked with for a long time. And while, yes, there are other standards, we feel that is the best baseline standard to start from. The second question that then comes up is, okay, what do we monitor, right? What kind of a fire alarm do I put in there? In addition to a fire alarm, do I go in, put in a smoke detector? Do I go in and look for carbon monoxide? Or, what are the different kinds of detection tools and devices that I need to go and put in there? And then finally, how do I go in and respond? So these are the three key things that any organization must solve. And so our goal is to quickly walk you through on how you might do that. So let's begin with where to begin. So as I briefly mentioned, the NIST 800-53 guidance, also known, on which the FedRAMP framework is built, provides fairly detailed information on where you can begin. So this is an example of a security requirement that systems should follow. For example, it specifically talks about account management as an example, right? And so it provides specific guidance on the kinds of things you need to monitor for, what are the kinds of things you need to do, and who are the users that you should impact, right? So it provides some level of specificity. So for example, if you're operating in a public sector environment or even HIPAA or others, we strongly recommend that you use the 800-53 guidance as a baseline to begin your continuous monitoring and security journey. So this is just one example of that. And then there are other requirements, right? So we talked a little bit about account management previously, and there are about 325 requirements overall. And if you go through these and sort of parse out the ones that talk about continuous monitoring, again, using the fire alarm analogy, it'll give you a pretty good idea. So, earlier I talked about systems and accounts, and here they specifically say that you should go in and try and monitor remote access, VPNs, etc., right? So this is just to sort of give you a flavor of where to begin and where you might go in and get access to requirements on where you might go in and start to flesh out the pieces that you need to go in and monitor. And from that, you can now start to define the specifics of your security requirement, right? So you have essentially a whole stack, full stack cloud hosting environment, which typically consists of your Amazon account. It'll consist of your VPC. It'll consist of your authentication system, your application data, if you're using Docker containers, things like that. And so this system, if you will, now you will go in and create what you call your security requirements, which as we have parsed through this framework, we have boiled it down to these specific bullets. And one of the areas, just like folks are familiar with DevOps, we think there is a significant gap in understanding and the needs around what we call SecOps. So really security and operations go hand in hand. And so the security requirements are around some of the things that Amit again talked about, making sure that your configurations are rock solid. You're going in and managing and monitoring your users and any anomalous events there. We'll show you some of those. You're going in and monitoring your file integrity, malware scanning. So again, these are just some specific requirements that you need to go in and implement to make sure that you're operating securely in the cloud. And these are just some examples of security and operations requirements. And then finally, you do need to have, and a lot of times alerting, monitoring, some of those terms are interchangeably used and it's confusing, but ultimately you do need an alerting mechanism and then a management mechanism and a security incident event monitoring and analysis system. So these are some of the key components, and my goal is to try and sort of walk you through from where to begin into then fleshing it out into some sort of a system or framework. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics on what do we go in and monitor. So this is an example again where for those of you that are using the AWS cloud service, you can see on the left, these are what we call control families, where it talks about specific things that should be done and what are then the corresponding technologies. And that's why we have selected some tools that we are very familiar with. And that's why our friends from Splunk and Trend Micro are on this call to talk to you a little bit about what they offer. And then finally, we have now gone ahead and taken it to the next level where now you've got the security requirements on the left-hand side. You have the capability description of what needs to be done. And then we've just developed sort of a security playbook. And so we work with customers both with Windows environments or Linux environments or a hybrid. And different customers have different budgets, right? So not everybody has the same level of budget, and depending on your risk tolerance and cost, we either have a free version or a commercial off-the-shelf version. And so I won't read through all of this, but again, the idea is that once you're starting from the requirements, now you're starting to sort of go into the specifics of what you want to go in and monitor, and then either use commercial tools or open source tools that might be able to help you accomplish that. And so again, this kind of a framework is a very logical way for you to begin to implement a robust continuous monitoring system. So here are some sample rules that we've typically seen when we talk about, so previously we talked about the sec part, and now we're talking a little bit about the operations part. And so a lot of times, the operations aspect of cloud is a lot of times overlooked. And so these are just some rules that we have established that can help you meet your security guidelines, as well as, quite honestly, save you money. So for example, if you've got unused EBS volumes, or if you've got what we call orphaned, you've got snapshot images, things where you're not doing a good job or an adequate job in monitoring your environment, you might have a situation where you're leaving data exposed that you don't even know about, right? So just by maintaining these good housekeeping rules, you're able to go in and limit the unknowns in your environment. So these are just some sample rules for you to go in and implement to ensure that your environment is compliant and secure. So now let's look at the final part, is how do you go in and put in the management, monitoring, and alerting capability. So for that, we are very happy to say there are lots of tools that are available to you. Splunk, we're a big Splunk fan. Splunk has a rich ecosystem of applications. One of the add-ons that we absolutely love is the Alert Manager. And so really we offer choices. And so, you can pick your poison, if you will. These are just some samples. So again, there are different solutions in the marketplace and with different budgets and different capabilities. And so customers decide to choose any which one of them or a combination thereof. So what we've done from a Stack Armor standpoint is we find that a lot of times customers get overwhelmed and they just don't either have the skills or necessarily the resources to be able to go in and implement all of this. And so for that, we've basically developed the Stack Armor security and compliance platform that's really an accelerator that packages all of this up and delivers it as a service for the customer. So for the interest of, in the interest of time, I'll keep it short, but if you're interested in something like this, please feel free to give us a call and we'll walk you through it. One of the interesting things that we have done is for a lot of regulated and compliance focused industries, we've developed sort of what we call an in-boundary model where we're able to go in and deliver this security architecture within your account and your VPC. And so that's what this diagram does, sort of convey that idea. And so we can again talk a little bit more about it, but again, it gives you a sense that you don't have to go and ship your data out to an unknown third party. And we always recommend that you maintain control of your data as well as your security data within your account and environment. So I'll just briefly show you a demo. I don't want to take away time from our other speakers. And so this is essentially our threat alert system here, where you go ahead and are able to log in through a console, and it takes you to a dashboard. And again, in the interest of time, I won't walk you through all the details, but the idea here is that you're able to go in and see all of the different threats and vulnerabilities within your environment. And so here, for example, is data coming in, for example, from Guard Duty, which is one of the services. And so it tells me, okay, that there is something going on in my environment. So we have a EC2 instance, which has an unprotected port. And obviously, it's something that I need to take action on, and we need to take this seriously. So again, taking it back to the fire alarm analogy here, if you don't have this information, and if you don't have somebody looking at this, then this is where things can go bad, right? So this is sort of just a quick way of staying on top of things. And again, it gives you information on the kinds of vulnerabilities that are there in your environment. And just to show you what this means, this is another example of the kinds of things that you really want to go in and continuously monitor. And this is kind of the activity that is constantly happening, right? So you might have SSH brute force attacks. So you want to make sure that you're going in and, for example, putting in a security group around it. So again, the key point is if you don't monitor these environments, then you will unfortunately get subject to these kind of attacks. And so that's why the continuous monitoring piece is a critical piece to this. So I just want to quickly show you that. We have other solutions for customers, but again, we wanted to just sort of show you a little bit about how to go in and implement what we call a bulletproof environment. So that's all that I had to share with you. And what I will do is I will turn it over to our wonderful speaker from Splunk, and we will keep the last, which is Saeed from Trend Micro. So Cam, I know you've been very patient, and I know you're a very busy man. So I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, JP. Hopefully you can hear me just fine here.
Yep, we can hear you great.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Cam Amir. I am a Splunker. Been with Splunk over about 7 years, and I'm going to talk to you about leveraging Splunk to do some threat hunting. And you can go to the next slide, please. Obviously, I may be making some forward-looking statements, so I have to share this slide with you. Just basically says don't trade on what I say. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So first of all, what is threat hunting and why do you need it? So as you're fully aware, there are incidents that are happening on a daily basis, as we just covered. Amit gave us a great rundown of many incidents that have happened in the past. But what threat hunting allows you to do is to actively search out these particular people that are trying to attack your assets. It's not necessarily just a alerting mechanism, but it's a little more active than that. And the reason being is that most of these are being funded by maybe nation states or competitors, but you have to be essentially active in your ability to defend your network. Go on to the next slide, please. So with Splunk, there are multiple ways of accomplishing this kind of threat hunting. At the bottom, you see that we have essentially just our platform for machine data. For those of you who are not aware of what Splunk is a, let's say, there's multiple ways of describing Splunk, but for the most part, we called it like the a platform for machine data, which allows you to collect large volumes of data at scale, and then gives you the ability to search that data. So what we've seen, and our customers have kind of guided us towards, is making Splunk more of a security SIEM. So what happened was we built Splunk to search the data, then we built a framework or an add-on on top of Splunk, and that's called our Splunk Enterprise Security. And what that allows us to do is basically go out and create dashboards and reports, and also orchestrate actions with respect to the security data that we're collecting. And then above that, we have another product that we call user behavior analytics that applies machine learning to a lot of this information that we're collecting and gives you more kind of proactive alerts and understanding of the data that's coming in. So the big deal here is that we can take that machine data, enrich the data, and then give you much more information of what's going on. Next slide, please. You can go ahead and build out this. Thank you. Perfect. So basically the feeds of data that are coming in, what we can do is we can take any threat feed and pair it with the information that we have collected in Splunk. So this allows you to start to understand correlations of events that are happening. So this is taking network data, endpoint data, access identity data, and then starting to see correlations across all those different silos. Next slide, please. So within enterprise security, so this is our SIM essentially, you have the ability to see across all these different environments. In this scenario, for example, you'll see that there is a host with an infected or potentially reinfection going on. When you click on that, so go to the next slide, please. It'll then drop you into a malware component that allows you to start to see correlated across these different environments where there could be potential issues. I believe you click again, it'll fill in. And yep, there you go. So here you can see, for example, which is the most popular signature across all these different technologies, and also start to understand ways of filtering this out to get to more granular information about the potential threat. And go ahead and click again. And this one you can, I think there's 4 build outs. I apologize for all the animations. There we go, perfect. So what this allows us to see now is we can actually take a particular asset and put it into this view that permits us to see kind of what's going on with that particular asset. So I can see it across multiple silos, and these kind of tie back to the kill chain. So I can start to see where the event may have occurred and at what point the infection may have started. And then you can start to see this across time. So for Splunk, time is a very important component. Everything that we do is time series based. So that's the first and probably the most important place to pivot off of and actually get correlated events happening. Go ahead and click the one more slide. And then above our enterprise security offering, we also have Splunk UBA, or user behavior analytics. This is now taking a lot of the, essentially the data that we've collected either in enterprise in Splunk, or we just collect the data directly into UBA. This now starts to give you more information around user behavior. So you can start to see, for example, one of my favorite is correlating when people take off. So internally you have a CRM or a workday or something like that where people take their time off, put in their PTO. We're able to correlate the information from that PTO and Windows logins. So say, for example, you have somebody who's on vacation and yet someone's using their credentials to VPN in and start logging into machines, that'll raise a red flag. And it'll actually alert you that someone's accessing when they shouldn't be. I have personal experience with this. I actually took paternity leave and I got an alert because even though I was on paternity leave, I VPN'd in to check something. I shouldn't be doing that because, you know, family first. But anyhow, I got an alert saying, hey, are you actually logging in? And I told them, yes, I was, and they approved it and they said, okay. But these are the kind of components that you can set up as a preventative measure. But as you start to grow with Splunk, you can actually leverage it to become a little more proactive and actually start hunting these particular threats and seeing how people are infiltrating into your network, and then tracking to see if they've left anything else behind. So I thought this might be a little more dynamic with questions. So I kind of gave myself additional time. So are there any questions or?
Cam, thank you so much for that. We'll get, so I know you've done a great job with this presentation, and I know we curtailed a lot of the goodness that you had. So we appreciate your, helping us with the time here. So we are collecting all of the questions. They're coming in through the chat window, and we'll pose them to you at the end. So really appreciate it. And I think it was a wonderful presentation. And, for the audience that we have online, I think hopefully you're getting sort of a sense of the flow. Amit talked about the business imperative and why it was absolutely critical for folks to look at the incident response, the continuous monitoring requirements, etc. Then we talked a little bit about the NIST framework, where you're really required to go in and monitor some of these things. And now into sort of the advanced topics on continuous monitoring, incident response, and building a secure digital infrastructure that requires things like being able to use analytics from tools like Splunk, being able to get into sort of a little bit of the advanced topics around threat hunting and user behavior analytics and the correlations, etc. And that's where I think Splunk really excels. So again, the goal is to expose you to different topics. We don't have time to go into any one of those in detail. Definitely we'll get back to you, Cam, and others with questions. I do want to hand over the baton to my colleague, Saeed Masood from Trend Micro, and have him talk a little bit about the Trend Micro suite. And so we, from a Stack Armor standpoint, have been using Trend Micro almost exclusively for the last 2 years. We're a Trend Micro partner. We're as well a Splunk partner as well. And Trend Micro is really a great product that we find does a great job in helping us meet the NIST requirements, especially for government, public sector, and federal contractors in doing so many different things. And they continue to sort of evolve their product line. So, Saeed, we're a big fan of the work that Trend Micro does, and I want to hand it over to you. And thank you so much for your patience in being on this call.
No worries, GP. Always looking forward to having more and more of these webinars with you. So good morning, good afternoon. I'm actually in Hawaii for FCR TechNet Asia Pac. So please let me know if my connection is good and if you can hear me okay.
We can aloha to you, and thank you for being here, and we can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Okay, so that's good. Aloha, back to you. Syed Masood, been around the industry for a while, joined Trend Micro about 1.5 years ago, and fascinated by their threat research. That was my key reason to join this team. And they have a lot of different products, but we're going to focus on this one product we call Deep Security, and which is part of our hybrid cloud security domain. As you heard other speakers, they had some excellent points about threats, and excellent points about compliance, about migration, about data being breached, and and how we monitor it. So continuous monitoring is the key theme this morning. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to touch upon some of the key areas on how Trend Micro Deep Security, which is part of our cloud security solution set, how it can help, and how folks like the Stack Armor teams can help you guys as their customers basically reach the NIST compliance or compliance that may be internal to your organizations, right? So GP had a great couple of slides where those requirements are a must. They are 853, and you have to meet them, and you have to have controls that map to those requirements. So what I'll try my best to do is highlight how Deep Security can do that. Before I get into that, I just wanted to let you know, if you are not aware of who Trend Micro is, it's about a 6,000 people employee company. We operate in, 50, 60 countries. We have network security, cloud security, endpoint security, and mobile security solutions. So we look at the threat vector holistically. We try to address it at multiple levels at multiple, trying to reduce the threat surface. So GP, if you can go to the next slide, please. So some of the speakers already addressed this. We have challenges, right? And migrating to the cloud, and you can't just pick up and say, hey, all my workloads are going to be in cloud day one. There's lots of planning. There's lots of challenges. You need to have control over your migration to the cloud. One of the key challenges that we continue to hear from our customers and partners, hey, I'm not able to keep an eye on my workloads running in my VMware, in my data center, in my cloud. I'm moving to AWS. I need something that allows me to have visibility, agility, allows me to continue to meet the compliance requirements, right? And in addition to that, allows me to my buying cycles or buying challenges. I need to be able to do it on a BYOL types of transactions or on a paper instance type transactions. So all of those challenges come up. The security and DevOps teams are having a problem. Hey, do I run my instances on an EC2 instance, on containers? How before we go production, how are we going to manage this? How are we going to determine if the build that's going to production doesn't have any malware on it? So it's all about monitoring, continuous monitoring. It's all about providing the visibility that you need. So GP, if you could please go to the next slide. And so, so a lot of the organizations look at endpoints and think that they can just install an AV solution and they call it a day. But the challenges for operating systems, for server operating systems, for cloud images are different. So you cannot address all those challenges with the solutions that are just designed for an endpoint. So looking at the challenges holistically and trying to address them, trying to address the compliance challenges as you move the workloads to the cloud. That's what deep security will try to answer. GP, please go to the next slide and build it out, please. Yep, thank you. So something similar, I think GP had a slide around this. So yes, Amazon and the cloud provider, they will definitely have their infrastructure security built in and they have best practices. However, there is a responsibility. Portion of the responsibility lies on the user, on the users of the cloud instances. So how do you address that? How do you have monitoring on the operating systems? How do you keep an eye on the data, on the processes, the memory, the ports, and what applications are running there? How do we provide vulnerability protection on the operating systems that are running? How do we provide host-based IPS services? So we have a solution called Deep Security. GP, next slide, please. That will address many of these challenges that are listed in the 853 NIST compliance document. If you are familiar with the document, as GP mentioned earlier, several hundred requirements. And again, we are not silver bullet, but we do answer the mail on many occasions, right? We look at, like I mentioned earlier, we look at the threat vector as a whole. We're looking at the point of entry. We're looking at lateral movement. We're looking at data exfiltration. So our solution, when it comes to complying with NIST 853, provides our customers one of the best flexibility and one of the most efficient solutions out there in the industry that will help you achieve those compliance, or NIST high compliance, or NIST, whatever level of compliance that you have internally, that's part of your requirement. And I think GP was mentioning that they have, various rules, and they have these offerings where they take all of this using Splunk, using Trend Micro Deep Security. They can help you achieve those types of compliance. GP, can you please move to the next slide? And so here's what Deep Security does. It's an agent that runs on the workload, and the workload could be running anywhere. It could be in Amazon, it could be on container, EC2, it could be in your private data center. The key thing about deep security is it's one single security management platform. We call that Deep Security Manager, and it provides you all of this, all of these security controls: host-based IPS, host-based firewall, web reputation, URL filtering, anti-malware, log inspection, application control, and so on and so forth, supported by behavioral monitoring, predictive machine learning, and if needed, also customized sandbox analysis. So we're looking at the threat, as I mentioned, holistically, right? So it's one agent. It's not like you need 3, 4 different consoles or management platforms, and you're logging in and you're trying to connect to all of this. And so when there is a anti-malware alert, you'll get an alert on our console. And I'm kind of glad that Cam is on the call, because we have a Splunk application that allows you to integrate deep security with Splunk. So all our alerts, be it IPS alert, application control alert, anti-malware alert, whatever, those alerts can be sent over to Splunk, and you can see it on the Splunk dashboards, what's happening, and then the correlation is done, and then you have actionable intelligence. And if that piece is not there, our Deep Security Manager will provide you a lot of that information, so you can take quick action to mitigate the threat. GP, please, next slide. So quickly, with Amazon, with Trend Micro, with Stack Armor together, we can put this, using the CloudFormation templates, the quick start guides that are available. You can achieve the compliance, the NIST high compliance. It's like we offer you deployment scripts, we offer you CloudFormation templates. You can use whatever deployment schema, Chef, Puppet, whatever your choice is. We integrate, and you could use that to push our agents out to the workloads. And by the way, I wanted to mention that the workloads, we do not care what operating system it is. We have the widest support for operating systems, be it Windows, Linux, Unix, AIX, and then list goes on and on. So that is also another key advantage we have, that you will have the peace of mind that, this doesn't support a certain Unix version or Solaris or some kernel of Linux, and we continue to add support for S kernel version changes and all Windows, right? So that's another key reason for having this one common platform, Deep Security Manager, to be able to push security policies to all these workloads, and update the agents with whatever security policy that you want to push out. Next slide, please. Quick snapshot of our dashboard. Again, you can see on the top left, you have the dashboard, you have the widgets. You can add, remove, or edit the widgets that we give you. You can just say, hey, I want to have just these 6 events. I want to watch them on a continuous basis. We give you tabs on action, alerts, events and reports. Events and reports are broken down into, is it an anti-malware event? Is it an IPS event? Is it a application control event, and so on and so forth. And then up top on the right-hand side, where it says help, I can click on it, and then under there's a drop down, and you'll see deployment scripts. So we tell you, we give you the option, hey, it's a deployment script for a Windows workload, for a Linux workload, and so you can just grab that, push that out using Chef, Puppet, or SCCM, or whatever you're using in your environment. And it's a very easy, simple, easy to understand dashboard. And that right in the middle where it says computers, this Deep Security Manager, you can integrate with, workloads running in Amazon, or workloads running, in your private data center in VMware. From the single common platform, you can control all those workloads and push policy, and you can have multiple policies, security policies that can align to your requirements. Next slide, please. And then, so the reason for using deep security is to provide continuous monitoring, is to provide visibility. Our IPS is our kicker because our Trend Micro zero-day initiatives, which finds the most zero days in the history in the industry, it is the largest vendor agnostic bug bounty program. And with all those that research, we also own the TELUS Labs, also the Trend Micro Labs. When they work together and we put all that intelligence into our IPSs, host-based IPS, and our next generation platform, which is the tipping point IPS, we are able to protect our customers from known vulnerabilities, but also from undisclosed vulnerabilities. And those are the ones that have not been announced to the public. And it's scalable. It scales up, scales down in the AWS environment, flexible, multiple deployment modes are available. And so really, it's a very effective and flexible solution when it comes to deploying. We also introduced recently a thing called Deep Security Smart Check for DevOps team. So and it's especially for for registries running in containers. And so we will scan the images on the registries and tell you before they go to production if the build has malware or ransomware or some type of vulnerability or not. So I'll leave the details for now, but I just wanted to mention that a pretty comprehensive solution that can help in many ways. Next slide, please. So just wanted to end with this Gartner report. You can grab this off our website if you like to read all the details. But clearly that, this is the recent report, and out of the, we addressed 23 out of the 26, capabilities that are important for cloud security and for cloud, workloads that are running in the cloud. And again, another validation from the industry, and a lot of people I know may or may not think of it highly, but I think it's the third-party validation that Deep Security does address the concerns and requirements that are out there. That's all I had, GP.
Sayed, again, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, you've provided a depth of expertise and experience, and we've really enjoyed our relationship with Trend Micro, especially the integrations that come out of the box. And all of the investment, quite honestly, that Trend Micro has made in automation, making armies available, having that wealth of information. That's where partners like us can go in and add value. So thank you very much for that. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we'll come to the last part and the most fun part, which is the questions. So stay on, don't leave yet. And so we've got a couple of questions that came in. The first one is, it looks like we have a lot of folks from the healthcare side interested in PHI and HIPAA. And so the first question is around, is HIPAA, if we're interested in, is high-tech Act compliance mandatory when dealing with HIPAA compliance? The second question is, if we are dealing with PHI data, is 800-53 alone and sufficient? And there are more that are coming in. So I'll take a quick first stab at answering those questions, and I will pass on to my colleague Amit to talk a little bit about this because it's right up his alley. So the High-Tech Act is really a consortium, if you will, of industry partners that have basically built a certification program around HIPAA compliance. And so really HIPAA compliance is a government program. There is no certification, so nobody can really go in and sell you HIPAA accreditation. And so there's an industry consortium that has gone in and sort of made that real, if you will. So I'll let Amit speak to it. But in the interest of time, I think specifically to the 800-53, from a technical standpoint, we believe that 800-53 controls are the most comprehensive, and other regulatory and compliance protocols like HIPAA and others, they all sort of are a subset. So if you're looking for meeting HIPAA requirements, we think if you look at 800-53, you will find it'll more than adequately cover it. But again, I don't want to steal Amit's time. Amit, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, GP. So a couple of things. First off, I'll answer the second question first about 853. I sort of disagree a little bit with GP's point because if you look at the HIPAA security rule, privacy rule, and the breach notification rule, there's over 169 discrete requirements that you have to meet. But however, the current version 4, 853, doesn't really cover all of the privacy requirements. But the next version that's going to be finalized, I think by year end or early next year, version 5, will cover some of those privacy requirements. But at this point, I'm not 100% certain that there's a one-to-one mapping back to HIPAA. So I would definitely urge you to look at the specific HIPAA requirements and how they map back to the 853. Now, going back to the High-Tech Act, just for everybody's edification, this act came out in 2009. Right, and it was part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And basically, at a quick high level, it really does a number of things. First of all, it provides additional enforcement around penalties and willful neglect. So if you are in breach of the HIPAA Act, you could be fined up to starting from $250,000 up to $1.5 million per violation. And the Office of Civil Rights under HHS is the one that kind of enforces this whole thing. And then another area is notification of breach requirements. So if you are a covered entity under HIPAA and you have a breach and it affects more than 500 patients or folks, then there's a requirement that you have to report that breach to HHS. And then, of course, you also have to follow along with if there's any specific state privacy laws that I briefly covered when I spoke. The other area is around business associates agreements. So one of the big changes here is that now it takes into consideration that if you're working with third-party vendors like software providers and others, if any of these third-party business partners, vendors have access to PHI data, you have to have a BAA agreement with them. And effectively, this is all, you got to look at it from like a supply chain perspective, right? So if there's a potential breach with one of your third-party vendors and they have PHI access, then you as the covered entity are responsible for their actions, and those guys will also be in trouble and could potentially face some serious fines there. And then, of course, the last point is around EHR access. So the High-Tech Act requires patients be given access to their PHI in an electronic format. Of course, I can go on and on, but if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me afterwards.
Yep. No, thank you. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think what I was alluding to is specifically the technical aspects of the control, but you're absolutely right. When it comes to HIPAA compliance, there are so many nuances, especially on the policies, procedures, response requirements, as you absolutely pointed out. I mean, it's fairly complex, and so your point is well taken. I have another question here for my colleague from Splunk, Cam. This is for you. The question is, like threat hunting, how often do you see them sort of coming up in your customer segments? I mean, so I guess the question, just paraphrasing, it looks like things like UBA and threat hunting are a little bit more advanced concepts. Are you seeing a lot of conversations around this? What kinds of organizations are you engaged? Are you finding are asking these kind of questions?
So good question. Typically, core Splunk, just being able to search and collect the data is where most of our customers are currently and kind of get the most value out of Splunk. But then as these requests become more sophisticated, I do see that. So I do cover public sector, but I do primarily cover our commercial accounts. And in the larger commercial accounts, we do see specifically around the financials and where there are kind of bigger targets on their back, so to speak. A lot more of this threat hunting becomes a little more of a kind of leveraging some next generation technology to be able to search this and become more aware of what's happening. So the good news is that leveraging Splunk gives you the ability to at least search the data and get very, very quick insights into what's happening. And then building on top of that search capability, you have an enrichment capability and so many other kind of apps and frameworks. And good thing is we also integrate with a lot of these vendors. So for example, the Trend Micro piece, we can pull the data from there to enrich the events that have happened and then correlate it with like a firewall or network or endpoints to get even more kind of understanding where that threat vector is coming from. So a lot of it is just kind of evolutionary into the more advanced threat hunting.
No, I appreciate that, Cam. That's awesome. Thank you for that insight. Syed, if you're still on, and here's a question for you. The specific question is, how does deep security or how does Trend Micro help with protection and vulnerability scans of containers and even serverless?
Okay, good. Yeah, got it. So serverless, absolutely. We bought a company called Immunio about a year ago. So they have an instance, an agent that, again, this is forward-looking. We're integrating that. So we're going to address the serverless requirements using Immunio. So if you go to immunio.com, you can grab a lot of information there. We haven't really integrated that with our solution yet, but it's available. On the container side of things, our agent runs on the container OS level, and then it has visibility into the registries, and then we will scan the registries, we'll scan the images on the registries, and so on and so forth, and then similar type of protection as if it's running on an EC2 instance.
Awesome. So I'm definitely going to check out your serverless security offering. It's new and exciting, so really look forward to that. So I think I'm getting a virtual nudge from our webinar organizers that we are out of time. So at this point, I know there are 6 or 7 other questions lined up, but we will try and answer those questions for you offline. And in the interest of time, I'm going to sign out. Yes, we will be making the presentations available. Please give us some time. This session is also being recorded. So we'll go through all of that logistics, and you'll definitely be hearing from us on being able to access the slides. And also, if you have questions, as Amit said, for any one of our speakers, please send it to the email address here, and we'll make sure that we connect you up with them and get you the answers that you're looking for. Again, thank you to my wonderful panelists, Amit, Cam, and Syed, for being on the session here and for responding at such short notice. And I also appreciate the audience that's online. So with this, I will go ahead and sign off, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar broadcast.
Thank you, everyone.